The meeting with the Italians had changed everything. Frank Lucas walked out of that social club on the Lower East Side with something more valuable than money. He had respect, he had connections, and most importantly, he had access to supply lines that no one from Harlem had ever touched before. But here is the thing about power in the streets. The moment you start rising, someone else starts falling. And in Harlem, there was another man who did not appreciate Frank's rapid ascent. His name was Clarence Mitchell. Everyone called him Mitch the King. He had been running numbers and other operations on the east side of Harlem for almost a decade. He had his own connections, his own suppliers, his own army of loyal soldiers. And Mitch did not like what he was hearing about Frank Lucas. Not one bit. The streets were talking. They were saying Frank had walked into an Italian club and walked out with a deal. They were saying Frank was getting product directly from overseas. They were saying Frank was about to become the biggest player in Harlem. Mitch heard all of this and made a decision. If Frank Lucas was rising, Mitch would have to push him back down. The war started with small things. A shipment that went missing. A corner that changed hands. Soldiers from both sides exchanging words that almost became something more. But it was Frank who decided to escalate things. He always believed in hitting first and hitting hard. If Mitch wanted a war, Frank would give him one he would never forget. The intelligence came from an unlikely source. One of Mitch's own men had a gambling problem. He owed money to people who owed favors to Frank. In exchange for clearing his debts, this man provided information. Very specific information. About a warehouse on the edge of Harlem where Mitch kept his cash reserves. $3 million, sitting in a building that only had 4 guards at night. Frank called a meeting with his most trusted men, his country boys. The men he had brought up from North Carolina, men who would follow him anywhere and do anything he asked. They gathered in the back room of a bar that Frank owned. 8 men around a table. No one else in the building. "Gentlemen," Frank said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of what he was about to propose. "We are going to take everything Mitch has. Tonight." He laid out the plan. Simple, direct, brutal. They would hit the warehouse at 3 in the morning. 4 cars, 8 men. Neutralize the guards without permanent harm. Take the money. Disappear before anyone knew what happened. One of the men raised a concern. "What about the war that comes after?" Frank smiled, that slight upturn at the corner of his mouth that anyone who knew him recognized. "That is exactly what I want," he said. "Mitch needs to understand something. I am not his rival. I am his replacement." The night was cold for Harlem. A light rain had left the streets slick and reflecting the few working streetlights. 4 dark sedans rolled silently through the empty streets. No headlights, moving like shadows through a city that was asleep. The warehouse sat at the end of a dead-end street, an old brick building that had once been a textile factory. Now it served a different purpose. 2 guards stood outside the front entrance. 2 more were inside, watching monitors and trying to stay awake. Frank's men moved with military precision. They had rehearsed this in their heads 100 times. 2 men approached from the front, dressed like late-night workers heading home. The guards noticed them but did not think much of it. Just 2 guys walking by. Until they were not walking by anymore. What happened next took less than 30 seconds. The guards were subdued before they could reach for anything. Not a sound, not a scream. Just the efficient work of men who knew exactly what they were doing. The door was breached. The 2 guards inside had even less time to react. Within 2 minutes of the first car stopping, Frank's men had complete control of the building. And there it was, stacks of cash organized in metal cases, More money than most people would see in 100 lifetimes. $3 million in unmarked bills. Frank stood in the middle of the room, looking at the fortune that was about to change hands. He did not smile this time. He simply nodded. Loaded up. Every case was transferred to the cars in less than 15 minutes. The guards were left secured but unharmed. Frank did not believe in unnecessary violence. Violence was a tool, not a hobby. Besides, he wanted these men to tell Mitch exactly what happened. He wanted Mitch to know. The 4 cars split up immediately. Different routes, different destinations. They would meet later to divide everything properly. Frank rode in the lead car, watching the dark streets of Harlem pass by. "By tomorrow, this city will be different," he said to his driver. "Every hustler in Harlem will know what we did, and they will have to choose sides." When dawn broke over Harlem, the news was already spreading. Mitch the King had been hit. $3 million gone. His warehouse cleaned out. His guards telling stories about ghosts who appeared from nowhere and disappeared just as quickly. Mitch received the news in his apartment. He stood by the window, looking out at the city that suddenly felt different. His hands were shaking. Not from fear, from rage. "Find out who did this," he said to his lieutenant, "and when you find out, bring me their heads." But Mitch already knew. Deep down, he knew exactly who had the audacity to pull something like this. There was only one man in Harlem bold enough to hit him directly. Frank Lucas. The war that followed would reshape the streets of Harlem. Corners would change hands. Men would disappear. Families would bury their sons. The next few months would be written in the kind of history that never makes it into textbooks. Frank knew this was coming. He had counted on it. Because Frank Lucas did not just want to take Mitch's money. He wanted to take his territory, his connections, his entire operation. The heist was just the opening move in a much larger game. What Frank did not know, what he could not have predicted, was how quickly Mitch would strike back. The retaliation came faster and harder than anyone expected. Next time, on Frank Lucas Chronicles. They came for Frank's stash house in the middle of the night. They took everything. But they made one fatal mistake. They let Frank Lucas live. And in Harlem, that was the biggest mistake you could make. That story is coming in Part 4.